Okay, in this video, I'm going to go over a really quick crash course on Xgen. This is purely just to get you guys set up and started. There are tons of resources out there, and maybe one day I can do a longer tutorial on how to do something specific, like facial hair groom or long hair groom on a character. But in this case, we're just aiming to use Xgen in like the barest bones simple way. So the example I have here is I'm going to be putting on some fuzz onto this rose. And let's take a look at that in a second. Here you can see an example of what I'm kind of looking at, or why I would want to put it on this plant anyways, is you'll notice on a lot of different plants that we have, these little tiny hairs, right? You can even see down here, there's like really, hopefully you can see that. There's even shorter hairs, and then there's longer hairs. So I could easily do that, in Xgen. Even this tomato versus the stem and the plant itself has different lengths of hair and thicknesses of hair, right? These feel thicker and these feel a lot thinner. But anyways, so there's a lot of different materials out there where you might want to simulate hair, and in some cases, you might be trying to do that with texturing. But sometimes, especially if you're working in VFX, you can't really get the effect without actually generating geometry. Another example would be a sweater, a piece of clothing. Let's bring up an example of that. Here's what this looks like, right? So we have a really loose wool knit sweater. And so it has a lot of flyaways, a lot of pull off little threads, a lot of little poofy pieces. So this would be another instance where, these kinds of little pieces right here would be kind of hard to generate in any other way besides using some kind of procedural modeling technique like Xgen. So we want to generate like little tiny pieces across the surface so that when we light it, we get those little tiny hits of those pieces, small pieces that are tufts of fabric. Here's some 3D resources or examples that I wanted to show of this effect. So you can see on this like Baba Yaga character, if we zoom in on the clothes, right, we can see there's this generated fabric, these little threads that are going across here. Even this rope, probably not the most successful use of it on this piece. It has these little flyaways. It's really good on this shirt right here, right? So you can see those little flyaways, and a lot of times what people will do is if they're not using like cards or transparencies or anything like that, they'll actually, have like you can almost see the clean edge of the geometry, and then along the edge of it, they just generated thread hairs that are all going in this direction with a little bit of randomization. So it almost looks like a frayed cuff, when in reality, it's just like a really clean cuff. It just has these little hairs growing on it to kind of just obscure that. Here's some other examples, right? We have this fur, right? Obviously, fur and hair is where we're going to expect Xgen. So something like, not necessarily Xgen, but some kind of hair grooming tool would, of course, be used for hair and facial hair and body hair and long hair. And here we also have this like kind of fuzzy Sherpa lined jean jacket. And again, this is going to be Xgen generated with these really thick tufts of hair. And you can even see they got that frayed kind of loose thread thing going on the edges of the shirt too. So a lot of different uses of it. You'll see it a lot of times in characters, but also there's like, anything else that's going to have tiny hairs. We can even do it for grass. We can do it for anything that we generate procedurally geometry on. Okay, so here I am inside of Maya. I have this file where I want to go ahead and render kind of like, I don't think a rose actually has this, a rose usually doesn't, but I'm just gonna go ahead and put in this rose, for example, that those hairy flyaway kind of fuzzies that tomato plant stem had. So this is what the render looks like right now. It just has really basic Pixar surface shaders on it. And so I just have, like a green material with some subsurface and then like a red material with some subsurface. And I haven't been really playing with the materials, but this is kind of what we're working with so far. So in order to get this to work, what we need to do is we need to make sure we have the Xgen plugin enabled. So we're going to go to, if it's not available here, right? It's not available when you switch to the Xgen workspace. So by default, this isn't going to be visible. So let's do Maya Classic. Okay. And I'm going to set this to here. Okay. So in order to get that Xgen window on here, what we need to do is if we have that Xgen tab pulled up, we just click on this little button here, and it's going to go ahead and add this toolbox over to the side and have this creation for Xgen. If you don't have that, we're going to go to Windows, Settings and Plugins, Plugin Manager, and we're going to scroll down until we find Xgen, and we just want to make sure it's loaded and auto-loaded. It should come with Maya by default, so you should have it inside your plugin manager. Once you've done that, what we want to do is we want to first clean up our file. So the first thing I personally always do is I will optimize my scene. So I'll go in and do optimize scene size. We can open it and choose what we want to optimize. In this case, I'm optimizing everything. I think what's probably most useful is removing unknown nodes, because I have had Xgen. I mean, Xgen is a very finicky program, and it is prone to crashing for a variety of reasons, a lot of different reasons. But in this case, I think removing unknown nodes helps. So I can just click on that, optimize now. I also tend to just optimize my file pretty frequently. You have to be careful. So for instance, if let's say you create a material and it's not currently applied on something, if you just optimize everything, it would delete those because I would have delete unused, shaders. So you got to be careful. But in my case, I don't really care. Okay. So the next step we need to do is we need to find the object that we are going to be growing our hair on. So in this case, I'm going to grow it from this main stem. Here's the thing about Xgen is just like a clean workflow is really important. So you want to be able to minimize as much as you can any points of failure, any areas where some funky thing about your model or your file is going to get in the way. So in that spirit, what we like to do pretty frequently is we like to grow the hair not directly on the geometry. Usually we grow it on a duplicate, and often because of characters, we call it a scalp. So what I'll do is I'm going to grow on the stem, but I'm going to duplicate it. And on this one, I'm going to call it stem underscore scalp. So that's just going to tell me this object is going to be the object that I'm going to, anytime I see scalp, I just think, oh, that's the thing that an Xgen collection or description is bound to. Okay. So the reason why we do this is because if I want to go back and make a modification to the UVs, or if I want to, delete or fix something on here, I won't be messing up my Xgen. My Xgen's bound to something else. If I change anything about my UVs, or about my model, definitely my model. If I change anything about my model, just Xgen is completely broken at that point, for that description. UVs might be, I don't know, I haven't tested in a while. So we have this scalp object. What we want to do on the scalp object is we want to make sure we freeze our transformations. So freeze all. And we're also going to want to make sure we delete history on this object. I can see if I look at the attribute editor, this object doesn't have any history, but I would still want to be delete by type history. This is really important because once you start Xgen, you can't delete your history. So if there's anything bad about its history, and you start Xgen, you can't go back and remove it because then, again, you're going to break your Xgen. So there's a lot of points of failure for Xgen. So we're going to go to the UVs. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure our UVs for our object are all on this first UV tile. You might as well if it's like the only object. So for instance, it shares it with the rest of the rows, right? There's a bunch of UV tiles here, but I'm just doing on this stem. What I can do is I can take this UV shell and I can go ahead and let's go and arrange and layout. Just going to lay this out. You essentially can maximize the size of your UV shell. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So, you can maximize the space. It doesn't have to match what the actual geometry, the original stem's UVs are. It doesn't really matter. But you want to kind of like take up as much of the space as you can. You can do stretching too. Stretching's not that big a deal. This is mostly just for if you're going to be doing the 3D painting. I mean, this is what I think it is. If you do the 3D painting, what it's going to do is it's going to, have enough space to work on. And you need good UVs. Your UVs cannot be in another tile. So it can't be over here, can't be up there. It has to be in this first tile for Xgen to work. So if you have a multi-tile asset, you're going to want to either, on that duplicated model that you're going to be messing with, the scalp object, you might want to rearrange them all into one scalp or break them into multiple materials or multiple objects so that they can all have one UV tile. Okay, so once that's done, this is where after I've messed with my UVs, I've cleaned up my model, make sure everything's good. Probably want to do a mesh optimize on it or mesh cleanup mesh, just to make sure you don't have any ingons or anything like that. We want to get all this stuff fixed before we start Xgen because Xgen is really hard to recover sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and delete by type history once it's all UVs are all done and the model's all done. Okay, so the next step before I even start Xgen is I need to set my project. This is something we generally should do in general, but especially Xgen relies on this because Xgen creates external files outside of Maya that it's referencing. And so it needs to know where those files are. So we're going to go in and we're going to go Window, Set Project. I'm going to go ahead and find where my file is, or where I'm setting my project. So I created a folder called rows. And I go ahead and select that and click set. If you haven't set a project yet, it'll ask you like, there's no workspace. What do you want to do? Say create default workspace. So when you get that, just click on create default workspace, and then your project's set. So if you ever go here and you go to the project window, it'll tell you your project is the Rose folder, and here's its location. Okay. And whenever you save that, so here, once you start doing Xgen stuff, you'll get an Xgen folder, as well as some Xgen files. And this Xgen folder is essentially going to have all of your maps that it creates for Xgen. Let me go and delete all these ones. These are old files. Delete that. Okay. All right. So once that's all done, we've cleaned up our scalp object. We duplicated our object, created a scalp. We cleaned it up. We made sure the UVs are good in one tile. We went ahead and deleted history on the object. We went ahead and froze the transformations out. Now, and we set our project. So now we can go ahead and do Xgen, and we're going to get a lot less errors if we do this whole process. So what we want to do is we want to create a new description. So we have what's called a collection and a description. A collection is essentially going to be, you can kind of think of like a description is like you're choosing an object or a type of hair. So let's say I was doing my face. A description would be like my eyebrows, right? And then another description would be my mustache. Another description would be like my sideburns. Another description would be my eyelashes. So like kind of like different areas where you're really trying to, where all the hair is more or less the same or part of the same group, but it's distinct from a different description. So like my eyebrows or my facial hair and my eyebrows are very different from each other in terms of where they're located, what type of hair it is, how long they are, all that stuff. So it's a good idea to break it down that way. I don't think there's really a limit to how many descriptions you can have, but there's kind of like there's advantages and disadvantages to having a bunch of descriptions. A collection is going to just be housing all those descriptions under. So if I was doing my face, I would have a face collection or a head collection, and that would have all my description underneath it, like my hair, my eyebrows, my eyelashes. Usually the collection I treat to like an object, but I think it can actually be shared amongst multiple objects. But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to call this one stem fuzz underscore. I like to do DESC for description. The reason why is if there's any external files or anything like in here, if I have this DESC, I know that it's related to Xgen descriptions. Just how I like to work. This one would be my object, so rows underscore COLL for collection. So all of my rows descriptions are going to be under this rows collection. So here's our first choice that we need to make. We want to do either splines or groomable splines. All the other ones are, relevant. They're just not something we're going to be using right now. So for instance, if you're going to scatter leaves across the ground and you want to use Xgen to do that, you can do custom geometry. Splines is really good for long hair or essentially long hair. So you can see here it says long hair, vines, anything that's going to be really long that you really want to control the shape. So if you want to control the shape of your strands really tightly, then splines are really good because you can use like a curve that you're generating to get the shape exactly. Groomable splines is going to be kind of like if you're doing fur or grass, or in this case the fuzz on like a sweater or on this this plant, right? It's going to generate a bunch of little tiny splines, and we can procedurally kind of tweak them and edit them. We can still control them, and it also, groomable splines has grooming tools, so we can actually like brush things and give them a different use it like essentially these interactive brush tools. Okay, if we're using groomable splines, we're just going to do randomly across the surface. If I was doing splines, we're not doing in this case, you could either choose to place and shape guides or just let them generate randomly across the surface as well. We're just going to do groomable splines. So say create. All right, so the first thing we're going to see is we're going to, I don't know why these are black. They should be a different color. Maybe it's because I have that. Okay, there we go. I have to turn off that default material. So we have two things we're looking at here. We have, and they're also kind of pointed a little funky. But anyways, so I have, essentially these are the preview grooms. So preview guides. This is only for the grooming tools. So if you're gonna want to paint the like orientation and bending and all that stuff on here, you can see I'm on the grooming tab by default. Those little yellow ones are the grooming guides. So it's just a preview so that when I'm like doing like when I'm like painting like a really thick fur coat or something like that, I'm working on really low fidelity little guides so I can see what the orientation of the hair is going to look like without rendering anything complicated. And then we also have our hair cards or hair generation, right? So if I click on this visibility right here, it's going to hide them. Click on this, it's going to show them. So that's what, these are like little representations of what our Xgen guides are going to look like. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to start over here. We can talk about grooming maybe towards the end of this, but I'm going to kind of ignore grooming. Something you need to keep in mind is there's this little settings tab down here, and it actually syncs your grooming, your grooming settings with your actual, this is the primitives. This is going to control the growth of your hair. Let me see, 1 second. Sorry, my mouse just died. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. My mouse died, so I'm now using a louder, clackier mouse. All right. So, this is where all of our settings for our hairs are. So when we're growing our hairs, like with the thickness, the width of the length of them, what direction they're pointing, where they're growing, how many hairs there are. And then we also have some of those settings over here as well. So they're kind of shared, and you can see the sync button. And so if I increase the density there, and I go ahead, and you'll see whenever you get that exclamation mark, it means I'm not viewing, let's hide that. I'm not viewing the most up-to-date version of my Xgen Groom. I'm looking at an older one. So I click on that button, you can see it goes ahead and updates it. So it's telling me, hey, you're looking at the latest version. But let's go ahead and hide that for now. What can be kind of frustrating is if you do a bunch of work over here and you come over here and change these settings, they can actually override or mess up the work you have here sometimes. It's especially true when you do a bunch of grooming. Like let's say I'll show you, I'll use like this pose brush, right? And so I can like, paint like a pose or a direction on my hair, right? And you can see now they have like a direction to them. But if I come in here and change the density, you can see it kind of overrides that and deletes my grooming. So if I do like a bunch of work, so I can come in here and like pose, maybe I want to make this like longer hair right here. I want to go ahead and bend the hair. I might go ahead and add some noise, right? So this is the cool thing about grooming. I'm probably not going to cover grooming. I'll just show you guys kind of what effect it has here, right? So I have all this really cool stuff I'm doing down here. But then if I go ahead and make any of these updates here, it goes ahead and messes it up. So you got to really be careful with this down here. I'm just going to turn off sync for now and turn off the visibility because I'm not really going to be using it for this case. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll grow that back out. We can set it to update preview automatically. It really depends on your machine. If your machine is really slow, doesn't have a lot of RAM, or maybe it's your graphics card, I actually don't know, then you probably don't want to update this automatically, especially when you have tons of hair. In my case, I could probably handle it. I'm going to switch off that grooming tool also. Okay, so I'm going to start from the top. So we're going to go ahead and start with the density. So the density is just going to be how many hairs are growing per unit or size unit on my object, right? If you see like it kind of clipping, it's only going to generate or show you what's within the camera full screen, right? So if I zoom out, I can see all the hairs. If I zoom in, it's only showing those hairs right there. So keep that in mind. I can go higher than this. I don't have to just be at, only up to 150, I think this goes, or 140. I can go higher. I can do 500, right? Lots of hairs. I'm just going to keep this pretty low. So I'm going to set this to like 40. And that's because in my reference, let's go here. In my reference, I got, they're not very dense. I mean, if I was doing these ones down here, I'd be more dense. But even these ones on the tomato itself are fairly sparse. So even this density might be a little too much. So something like that, maybe. Okay, so that's my density. This mask is going to control where I want the hair to grow, right? I can actually paint a mask. So anything you want to actually kind of like artistically control, like you want hair to be longer or shorter in a specific location, you can come here and you can see it has, what we'll do is if I open this expression editor, so this button right here is an expression editor. What it does is it shows you the essentially what expression it's using to control this attribute. So right now by default it's just set to 1. This is a comment right here, but 1 essentially means that everything is fully on. There's no blocking out any of my density. It's all 1. If I set that to 0, it'd be black, right? And so hair's not growing anywhere. you'll see this is kind of hint. We'll talk about it in a little bit painting masks, but this right here, maps, this right here is referencing a map on my drive. So if I want to paint a map so it grows in some areas and doesn't grow in other areas, that's what this is referring to. But you can see it's commented out. So let's set that back to 1. Oop. Click apply, accept. All right, so we got that density. We're going to skip these for a second. You can change your object to be a different type of object. So I could do like a card. I'm just going to stick with a spline. We're going to control them using attributes, right? We're not using guides. We can change right here this modifier CV count. We'll come back to this in a little bit, but this is going to be like how many points are on the curve of my hair. So the more I have, the smoother it's going to look. I'm going to come down here, and now we're going to look at our first, essentially, settings that we're going to be working with. So by default, because I'm doing grooming, if you're not doing grooming and you're doing the guides, it's going to look a little bit different. But by default, you can see it's referencing a texture map. So it says map, description. This is the folder location. So if I came down to rows, I can do Xgen, collections, description, and then you can see I have length, right? So there's a length map, and you can see it's a .ptx file. That is a ptext file. So a ptext file is a type of texture file, kind of like a JPEG or a PNG, but it's not image based. It's not flat image based. It's actually a file where the texture, the colors, all that stuff is based on the actual object itself. It's based on the vertex information. So this was developed by Disney. It's not super widely used, but it's used at Disney, and it's used by Xgen, which is also developed by Disney originally. So it's just a certain file format. Xgen or ptext is very much based on your model. So if you change your model, the ptext files essentially won't work with that model anymore, because you don't need UVs. That's the cool thing. So it's not image based, it's not UV based. It's just model based. So that's cool because we don't have to do UVs. So we don't have to deal with the UVs. But the problem is, it will, besides a couple other things, including it just being a little harder to use than flat images. If you mess with your model at all, you lose this file essentially. While we're here, this is also another thing that's important to keep in mind. When you're using Xgen, you want your ptext files to have the name of your model. So you can say this says stem_scalp. Okay. So if I come in here, I have stem_scalp. If I change this name, that can mess up Xgen as well because it doesn't know what model it's supposed to be associated with. Why it does that, I have no idea. It's kind of weird. But essentially, you just want to make sure your model name stays consistent, or if you change your model name, you just got to change it on those ptext files as well. Okay, anyways, so it's just saying, hey, pull the map that's in that location in the description. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, there's two options I can have, as I can come in here and I can actually write like a little script, right? And we'll come to that in a second. I'm just going to actually make this a little simpler and just go reset to slider. So now it's a slider. You can see it still has an expression. I can go in, and now that expression looks like this. And it says, it has a variable A. Right now it's at 0. And this comment, this is really cool thing about the expression editor, is that when in this comments, you can actually just change how the UI or GUI is set up. So you can see this is going from -1 to 1. If I set that to 0 to 1, you can see now it only goes from 0 to 1, right? You can see it updating as I move that slider. And that slider is going to be out here too. So let's go ahead and go, let's see, 0 to, let's go there. There we go. Click apply, accept. You can see now we have that slider here, right? And so we can change that length. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to whatever length I think it should be based on my reference. We'll just go to like, I don't know, right there. And we can do the same thing for the width. So we'll reset the slider. I can come in here and set that maybe to 0. So 0 to 1, I don't want to go negative values with my length and width. Say accept, and we'll just bring that up. And really for this kind of thing, we don't need the hair to be very big. It's probably going to be less than 0.05. So I might even come in here if I want finer tooth control for the width. Is this the width of one I'm working on? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to set this from 0 to 0.05. Click apply, accept. So now you can see it only goes from 0 to 0.05, and so now I have finer tooth control. So I'll make it a little thicker. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to control so right now these are very consistent. These are like essentially spaghetti noodles, right? Dried spaghetti. They don't have any variation to them. But on most hair-like objects, including fabric probably, but all the hair on your body is going to have a taper to it, right? It's going to be thicker at the base and thinner at the tips, including that tomato reference I have. So we have two options for controlling this. We have width ramp and we have taper. We'll start with taper just to show you. They kind of, in a lot of ways, they kind of do the exact same thing, but they have different types of controls. So I turn on taper, you can see now these are like spikes, right? They kind of go from thick to thin. And I can change this taper start, so it's determining when it starts to taper. So if I use that very high, you can see it's like, really, really thick, consistently thick, and then right to like almost a pencil, right? And then if I bring that down, it's going to be a constant kind of thinning out. Okay, so there's that. We also have this width ramp. If I go to this width ramp, I can bring that tip down. You'll see this R to T. This is the tip. This is the root. And you'll see this when we go to modifiers. The max, this top is 1. You can see the value. If I click on this, its current position is 1. The value is 1. If I bring it down, it's going down to 0. So the width is now 0 at the tip, or it's 1 at the tip. Oh, it's multiplying on top of this. So it's technically 0.025. And I can do the same thing with the root, right? So a lot of times, like, I'll frequently for like, I wouldn't do it on this type of object, but like for eyebrows or something like that, because of how skin shaders kind of interact with it, I might go in and, have like a thinner roots, right? Like just at the root, have a thinner, just because it tends to like help integrate a little bit better when it penetrates the skin. But in this case, we're not going to really worry about that. It's not something I would do for this type of object. We also change the interpolation, and we can add more points, right? I can just add a point here. If I want to get rid of it, I can just click on the X. But, we can create whatever crazy shape we wanted to, right? So I'll just get rid of these though. So we can go ahead and have this linear, or we can change it to different interpolation. If I do smooth, right, you can see it's going to kind of have like a smoother transition towards that shape. And I might pull it out here. We might bring that thickness just a little lower. Okay. All right, so that's length and width. Those are the ones you're going to use the most. Two other ones I tend to use as well. Let me go ahead and save this. So it's really important to save this pretty frequently. So when you save it, it creates your Xgen files, .xgen. So if you do crash or you need to reload your Xgen and re-import it, it actually has that file. So I'll just go ahead and file save scene. So when you save it, it creates the file. And don't worry about that. And then so you want to do that. You also want to do versions. When you do versions, that's going to help with your Xgen too, because it's going to back up. It's not going to back up your map, so you have to be careful with that. But it's going to back up your Xgen collection description, like these settings. So doing versions is also good. So do file, increment, and save. Okay. So the one I'm going to do is tilt. So you can see tilt is going to be going left and right along the normal. And then, okay, this one tends to like to try to calculate. So this is one where I would stop it whenever I'm doing it. So you can see it's thinking about it. I don't know if this is just on my computer. It might be Xgen or it might just be my computer. But let me go ahead and resume it in a second. All right. So that's tilt in. And then around in is the normal. In stands for the normal. Is going to be up and down. So it's left, right, up, down. So this one's left, right. This one's up, down. Not going to really mess with them right now, but we can vary these a little bit. We'll talk about varying. Bend, we really don't want to mess with these too much. These are going to be based on our grooming tools. That's not something you can really calculate and enter as numbers. Same thing as the orientation on that. So it's really, for me, density, the mask on the density, length, width, one of these two settings or both. You can do both of them. Let's set that to 0. Let's make sure that's not -1. And our tilt in and around in. Okay, so now let's look at varying these, because these are very uniform, right? It's very clean. So what I'm going to do is we're going to edit our expressions. So I'm going to start with the length. So I'm going to give it a randomized length. Let's go ahead and I'm going to increase my density so you can see this, right? You can see there's a perfect clean line, right? So I'm going to come into the length. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to write expressions very basically. I recommend, there's actually, I think on the Xgen guide webpage, they actually have example expressions you can copy paste so you can learn from them. You can load in expressions. Let me show you guys that really quickly. Let me go ahead and copy this just really quickly so it'll be easy to get back to. You can go in here and you can load expressions, samples, and I could do, for instance, like we can load colors. You could load in like a noise, right? And you can see this, I have a lot of weird controls on it. If I open it, you can see this loaded in a piece of script and it has all these settings on it. I don't want that though. I'm just going to go back to this. So getting used to those is really, or getting used to like loading in samples, because there's some really useful ones in there. They're really cool. I definitely recommend you guys try them out and take a look at them. Okay, so here's the basic nomenclature, right, or syntax, right? Use $sign for calling or defining a variable. So let's say I wanted to define a variable, var, so $var. If I do equals, I'm setting that new variable, or that variable that might have existed already, equals to a value. So mostly I'm going to be working with numbers, and that's really what we should be worrying about. You can do strings and stuff like that, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. So I'll just say this one's like 2. So that's my variable. Any line you create, we have to do a semicolon in order to, you know, close that line and make it legal. And if I want to do comments, I do a pound sign, and then I can type stuff. And like I said, you'll have to look at some examples, but we can actually type stuff in this comment to change the UI. In this case, I'm using a number. I can set a range, so like 0.0 to 10.0. And so that'll give me a slider once I say apply, right? And so that slider goes from 2 to 10. Okay. And then the last line right here is essentially what we're returning. So if you're familiar at all with computer science concepts, right, returning is what the result is. It's the number or whatever value that comes out of our function or our script, right? So in this case, I'm setting a variable a equal to this number, which can be affected by a slider. And then for the length, this is feeding into the length. It's returning a. So whatever a is going to be my length. So what we can do is we can use a random function. So we can come in here and I can define a new variable if I just want to be kind of nitpicky about it. So I'm going to say $ran, defining a new one. And I'm going to use a rand function. I recommend you look up all the expressions. They're not that hard. They're pretty easy. You see it when I'm typing, it goes ahead and auto completes for me. I can click on it, right? You see, and it also pops up information. So it generates a random number. It's expecting a minimum and a maximum number. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what I do is I essentially want to take whatever my length is, and I want to randomize all the hairs. So some are longer, some are shorter. So on this one, I'm going to say 0.5. So that's going to multiply my hair to be half the size, and then 1.5. So it's going to be, some hairs are going to be up to 50% larger. Maybe just do 2. Let's try that. Okay. And this isn't my final line, so I still have to add a semicolon. Now I need to combine those together, right? Because right now it's just returning this. It's ignoring the randomization. So I'd come in here and just multiply by rand. Or sorry, $ran, my randomized variable. Click on that. Click apply. Say accept. And now you can see those hairs are randomly lengthened. And so we can do the same thing on the width. I'm just going to actually go ahead and copy paste this because it's going to make it easier. So I'm just going to do the same thing. Come over to the width. I probably don't want to vary the width that much. So I probably might do like 0.7 to 1.3 maybe. And so now they have like a varying thickness to them as well. And I could theoretically do that for the tilt in and the round in, right? So I can come in here and we'll just type in rand. And so this one is, I think, negatives to positives. So it's not 0 to 1, it's negative values to positive values. So I might say like -5 to 5. So I'll click 5. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like when I click on apply. Okay. Did I not do it right? Let's see, 1 second. Let me diagnose this really quickly. Oh, duh. All right, so it's multiplying 0 by this randomized value, so it's just giving me 0. So instead of doing this, actually, you know what? Actually, this is actually a pretty cool idea. So I'll do, I'll copy this. Copy, click apply, accept. So now when I bring that tilt in, when I bring it up, it's multiplying whatever this value right here is by -5 to 5. So it's kind of multiplying by 5 and pushing it either direction. So you can see now those hairs are going in other directions. Let's change this from -180 to 80 to, like, let's say 0 to 180. And click accept. And so if you can see when it's, let's make sure we get this to 0. Doesn't want to quite be at 0. 0.0. Let's set that to positive. Click apply, accept. So there we go. All right, so 0. So they're all pointing off straight off. And then as I increase that, they're randomizing. So they're going in between -5 times this to +5 times this. So I might just add a little bit. And I might just copy paste this, copy, apply, and then paste this into the round, which is going to be pushing it up and down. Click apply, accept. Okay. So this is going to be the up and down value. Well, actually, this one's left and right. This one is up and down. I don't know. Should be one's one direction, one's the other direction, but they might not all be consistent. So I'm just going to let this be a little bit, not a whole lot, just enough to kind of skew them around a little bit. Okay, so that's the start. I'm going to come back up here to density. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this density back down. Okay, let's take a look at how we can paint our maps for this. So first off, in order to be able to do this, to paint our maps, I'm going to go ahead and hide my normal object so I can see this. And we're going to go ahead and show, oops, this guy's inside that group. I might leave him in here. I might bring this all back and I'll hide all the rest of my object. Hide. All right, so I'm just looking at this. On my scalp, I probably should just go ahead and assign a Lambert material. So if you want to do the 3D painting in the viewport with the 3D painting tool, which the maps need, then you need to essentially have a Lambert material. It won't work on like a Pixar surface or any other type of material, a non-Maya material. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and do this on density. So we're going to control where it grows. So if I bring back like the rows, let's see that, right? You can see it's right there. I might not want hair growing at the top of this because it might penetrate through these petals, right? If I hide that, right? Hair is growing from up here. So that's one area where I might want to turn it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and by default, these don't have a map. So I might want to come here and click create a map. So create a map. This map resolution is going to be essentially how pixelated our ptext file is. So I might want to make that higher. So I might do like 16 maybe. And I'm going to call this, let it be the density mask. So it's going to be under density and then mask. And we'll say create black or white. White's obviously going to be fully visible. And I can come in here with my brush settings. And I'm going to go ahead and paint black. So if I'll paint here, let's go ahead and paint all the way around here. Right. And there we go. Let's say that's what I want. Now I click on this little save button right here. And what it does is it essentially saves that map and now loads it in. You can see this isn't quite working, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure I am painting as thoroughly as I can. If there's any like non-white, or if there's like any like almost not fully black values, it might have a problem. So I'll click save. Okay, so you can see a lot of that hair was gone. So sometimes you have to go over that area extra if you really want to remove it. So let's go here. Paint that right there, click save. Sometimes these guys can be really stubborn. So let's go ahead. And another thing you can do is you can save your texture here and then try to save it there. I don't think that's going to actually fix this problem. But yeah, so the painting thing can be a little finicky sometimes. It's not my favorite part of working with Xgen. But yeah, you can see it's not quite picking that last hair out. Something else we can do is I'm going to actually flood this back with white and save it again. Okay, is we can also remove what's called bind patches from our object. So I don't want any hair growing up here. What I can do is I can select that and I can go up to my description, bind patches, and remove selected faces. You can see here that it went ahead and now it's not growing hair. Because we had selected the whole object originally and did create description, it added all of our polygons as bind patches. But if I was doing like a face, I would want to only grow hair from a certain region. I don't want hair growing from everywhere because then I'd have to go in that density mask and paint everywhere out, right? It's more easy. Like I'm not going to be growing the hair out of like my lips, for instance. So I wouldn't want that geometry to even be starting to grow hair in the first place. So when you start, you can define a part of your model by selecting the geometry. And then when you do create the description, it will grow only from that part of the model. Okay, so that's how we paint our masks. We have to be aware that if, for instance, let's say I want to do a length map, if I like this expression here, I'm just going to go ahead and copy it before I add a texture map here, or a paint map. So I'm going to go ahead and create a mask, or map. Whoa, that's big. I'm going to do 16. I'm going to do 20 maybe. Create. So if I open up that expression, you can see my expression's gone that I had before. So that's why I wanted to save it. So I'll go ahead and paste it in here. We'll get rid of this last line. So we're just bringing back the slider and we're bringing back the rand value. But now we also have this paint map. And so you have to think about the paint map as a multiplier. It's a multiplier from 0 to 1, where white pixels are 1 and black pixels are 0. So if I paint black, it's going to multiply 0 with whatever these values are. So I'm going to define this also as $map, maybe. There we go. Not $a, because this is $a. All right, so I want to multiply my rand value, so $rand. And I want to multiply the paint map that I'm going to paint. So I'll click paint map and click apply, accept. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and come into this map. So you can see length. We have our attribute that's essentially the slider setting. We have our map, and I can click on this paint button here to paint it. So if I want to go ahead and let's make this bigger, and I might use like a lower opacity, I might come up here, and let's say I don't want it to be as long up here. I click on save. You can see it's multiplying our length by that map, so where I painted black. And so I might go ahead and set that back to white, maybe bring this down lower. Let's actually set it to like a mid-gray value. There we go. So we'll set it to like that. Okay, and now when I go ahead and save it, right, so it's a little bit shorter up here. So if you want to control like through painting and marking out areas, this is how you can do it. In my case, I probably don't need that kind of thing for this. I'm not going to be painting any areas out, so I'm going to probably just going to get rid of that map. The map still exists. I'm just erasing it from the calculation. Click apply, say accept. And now when I generate that, it's ignoring my map. Okay, so that's how you can paint maps. I can paint maps on anywhere where you have this expression, and you can say create map. Okay, so we know how to create variation. Let's go ahead and once we created this, if we're not painting maps, we can hide the scalp. The hair will still be there, and we don't need to see the scalp, because especially when we render, we don't want to see the scalp object. It's just going to get in the way. I'll bring all these guys back. But if you do want to paint a map, you need to see the scalp when you're doing that, because it's going to apply a temporary texture in Maya and the viewport to that object. So if it's hidden, you won't be able to see what you're painting. Okay, so Shift H, I'm going to show this all again. Okay, so all this is looking pretty decent, but the problem is it's a little too plain, uniform. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys modifiers. So modifiers are what makes, in my opinion, Xgen super cool and super powerful. A lot of other, of course, grooming and procedural growing tools have this as well, but you know, whatever. So if I want to add a new modifier, I'll click on this right here, click add modifier. I'll go over these really quickly. Anim wires is if you want to animate your hair or your groom so that it like blows with the, or like you want to make it feel like it's bouncing. So you're animating it and you're moving like a curve or something like that. So it controls the groom. Some of these I actually have no idea. I've never used them before, like groom bake, apply net force, block anim. I've only really cared about the grooming specific ones, like creating the groom. So clump is going to be drawing your hairs together. I'll click create clump. It's not going to be something that's really useful for this kind of thing, but if you're doing like eyelashes or even facial hair or definitely head on the hair, you're going to need this clumping modifier. I'll come up here. I'm going to increase the density. Let's go up higher so we can see this 200. So on the clump, by default, it doesn't do anything. You can see it says no clump guides found. We can come down here to set up maps, and we'll click generate. So it's going to show me a preview of how many clumps it's going to create. So you can see this is not very many clumps. And when I click save, you can see it's creating these clumps. So it's pulling the hairs together. So if I go in and create like a higher density, generate, let's do something like this, generate, click save. You can see now it's clumping all those hairs together. Right? So it's just essentially pulling the hairs together. And like I said, like that width modifier, we can control, let's turn that back on, what parts of the mesh it is, or parts of the hair it's affecting. So tip, so the roots aren't pulling and the tips are pulling more. More and more we get closer to the end, the more it pulls. If I pull that root down, you can see it's going to pull like that. Okay, so that's basically how clumping works. There's a lot of settings, and clumping is really important if you're going to be doing like a hair groom. So definitely get used to that if that's something you're aiming for. But in this case, I don't really care that much about it. In this case, or also on this one, this modifier specifically, clump, this is the value, how much it's clumping. If I go higher, I think it does. Yeah, it like kind of over clumps. Not something you'd probably do. If I wanted to kind of semi-clump it, I do like 0.5, right? So it's kind of clumping. And then 1 is obviously 1. And then we also have a mask. So if I want in some areas for it to have it, so for instance, what I can do is I can come over to expressions. Let's create a quick expression like rand clump and click on plus. I'm gonna load in a sample, so load samples. Let's see, I wanna do color, and let's just do noise. Okay, and yeah, this is looking, let's increase the coarseness there. There we go. All right, I know I did that really quickly. I'm gonna grab this rand clump value. So I'm gonna come in here and we're gonna mask it. So we'll do rand clump and then open close brackets. If there's ever a function, that's what that is. So it's pulling that function, that expression I created. So it's taking the result of that. Say accept. And now it should be, so let's go ahead and we'll take it open like this. So we'll go here to right there. I'll go ahead and remove that and just set that back to 1. Click apply, accept, and oh, it wasn't even visible. So here's 1. I'll come back in here. I'll dump that in again. Click apply. You can see it's kind of semi-effective. Some areas where it's white, it's clumping. Some areas where it's black, it's not clumping. And some areas where it's gray, it's kind of clumping. What I could do is I can also use that in the setting up those maps. So I can go ahead and choose this mask right here. I'll add that again. Click on generate, and let's bring that density up. Let's see, density higher. And so it's kind of hard to see, especially on this type of object, but it's like creating more clumps and smaller clumps in certain areas and less clumps in other areas. Again, using that random noise that I created for that. Click save, right? And so now my clumps are kind of differently sized. It might be a little hard to see, but some clumps are like smaller chunks, fewer hairs. Some of them are taking a bunch of hairs. Anyways, okay, so spent enough time talking about clumping. Let's get rid of that one. And I might even just delete that one. I don't need it. Okay, so we also have coil. So what coil does, it gets kind of crazy. And we probably just want to bring the count down. So we'll just bring the count down to like point. Actually, no, we want to leave the count. Count's fine. We want to bring the radius down. That's how much it's coiling. So we'll do 0.1, right? And you can see it's essentially going to do this like kind of little wrap where it's wrapping the hair around itself. Let's bring that density back down. We don't need that density high again. So we'll bring it down to something like that. So you can see now it's like kind of gross. It's kind of like body hair or something like that. So we have, again, masking for where we want the effect and where we don't want the effect. Count is going to be how many coils. So I do like 0.2, right? You can see it's kind of doing, it's like these are like bigger coils. And if I do like 5, right, it's going to do a bunch of coils. We're actually not seeing all 5 of those coils because these splines or these little hairs don't really have very many points to them. So if I come in here and go over to this modifier CV count, this curve only has 5 CVs. So if I have, especially on long hair, you want to increase this number. And so if I set this up to like, let's say 15, right? You can see now I can see all 5 of those coils because it has, that curve has more resolution essentially. If I'm not doing this, you don't necessarily need it to have that, especially if you have a bunch of hairs, it might get kind of expensive. But now we can see that 5 coils, bring that to 3, bring that to 2, bring that to 1. And there we go. Radius is essentially how much it's going to coil, right? So let's just reset that to a slider so we can see it, right? As I increase this, it's like the size of those waves or that coil, you can see it's coiling. It's like rotating it like this. The size of those coils is getting larger and larger and larger and larger, right? So probably just want to bring this fairly low like that if I was using this tool. And then this is, again, is it affecting the tip? Right? Is it only affecting the tip? Is it affecting more of the root? Where is it at? So this is just showing me what it's multiplying on. Same thing with the count. Is it affecting the root more or the tip more? Okay, so that's coil. I'm going to turn that off for now. Okay, I'm going to come in here. Collision, we're not going to worry about. Control wires, we're not going to worry about. Cut is, I don't really use cut personally. I know other people do. Yeah, I don't know if it actually has, okay, it doesn't. So there's one that you can do a geometry cut. So you can actually take a piece of geometry and have it like cut out the hairs so it doesn't penetrate it. But cut's going to kind of do the same thing as that randomizing the length value. So if you weren't using those rand values, you didn't want to worry about that. You could just use cut to random. So you can see it's randomly cutting the hairs by 0 to 0.2. That's just kind of what cut does. I'm going to delete that though. All right, we're gonna ignore that. There's mesh cut, so if you want a piece of geometry to cut it. Noise is also essentially, let me look at the rest of them. Yeah, noise is the only other one we're gonna talk about. So for actually creating the look of the groom, we really only want to worry about clumping, coil, cut, and noise. These other ones are going to be more utilitarian or utility based. So if I want to do something like converting it to a different format, or if I want to have like force, like wind or directional force or animation affect it, those other ones are important. But for this one, we just want to worry about clumping, coil, cut, and noise. So I'll say noise. And so noise is going to feel very similar to the coil. It's just doing a different shape. So what we're going to do is, and it's also randomized. So if I bring this to, let's see, frequency, like a higher frequency, this is going to be like the count on the coil. So how many it's doing. So you can see it's getting really kinky. So I'll bring that back to 1. And then magnitude is, just like the coil size or radius, this is going to be how much it's doing the noise. If you see these are actually getting longer, if you want to kind of keep that from happening, you can just change this preserve length to, I think, 100. So it's like from 0 to 100. And so it's never going to get longer than the hair originally was. Okay, so that's noise. So noise and coil, actually use them pretty frequently on top of each other, especially with long hair. In this case, with such short hair, they kind of do very similar things. So I might go ahead and bring that magnitude down. So we'll do like 0.5. Actually, let's bring it up. Let's set this to slider, and we'll go ahead and the expression, and we'll let this go all the way up to like 10. And we don't need negative values, so we'll just set that to 0. Click apply or accept, and then we can increase that, and maybe I want it to really only affect the tip, right? So it's affecting the tip more. And then we can turn on that coil and bring that counts down. So let's bring it down to like 0.3 and maybe bring that radius down. Okay, it's looking a little weird. It's a little too kind of janky, but that's just because I'm doing that noise just on the tips. But I kind of want to show you guys how we're adding it together. And of course, if I had that clumping, this is in a layer stack, so it's essentially whatever's on the bottom happens first. So if I set up those maps, generate, let's create, generate, save, right? So that clumping is going to pull the hairs together. Let's turn those off for now. Let's turn that on. It's not having a huge effect, maybe because we don't have enough hair. So let's go ahead and bring this hair up. There we go. So now we're seeing it better. And so then, coil and then noise. Right? So it's just kind of adding on top of each other. So it's like an order of operations from bottom to top. Okay, let's bring that back down. Okay. And we'll come back to that grooming, and I'll get rid of that clumping. I don't need the clumping. Delete it. Okay. One last thing I want to show you guys here is something you can set is a stray percentage. So right here, set stray percentage. This is going to be essentially like flag a couple of your splines or hairs as quote unquote stray. And so this is a percentage of your hairs that will be considered stray. And then you can use that as a function essentially to say, hey, if this is stray, do this. Otherwise, do the normal stuff. So you can grab like a certain percentage of your hairs and make them longer or give them more noise or change their color. So it makes sense with stray, like hair, like stray hairs, like a couple of your hairs are kind of flying away and not behaving right. So this is what this is. So if I set this to like 10, again, a scale of 0 to 100 in this case, and I come in here and let's say I'm going to add a new one. And we're going to do noise. Let's do noise. And this one, I'm going to make that magnitude big. And we'll do like 7. And we're going to bring the frequency down, so like 0.2, right? Because I just want these to kind of like grow longer. That's kind of what I'm using for them. It's not something I would normally do, right? But I only want to do it on like a couple of them, right? I only want a couple of them to be like weird, freakish long ones. So what I'm going to do is come to this mask. We'll turn this on. Go to mask. Open this up. So you can see by default it's just 1. And I'm going to write it like this. I'm going to do stray. So that's a function, right? So we're returning the result of stray. And you can see when you set the stray, if I go set stray percentage, it says right here, specify the percentage of time that the stray expression returns true. So when I call that, it's going to return true 10% of the time on 10% of the hairs. So I'll say stray. And then this is the if-else statement. So if you're familiar at all with, hopefully at this point, computer programming, scripting, functions, expressions, whatever, we have our essentially an if statement, like if it's this, then do this, otherwise, or else do this. So what we're saying is stray, question marks is essentially everything to the left of this. If it's true, then do the first thing I'm going to type is 1. So it's going to turn the mask on 1. Else, so this colon represents else, and then 0. And I don't even need that semicolon because I'm not adding another line. So what this is saying is, this is our if statement. So it's going to return, if it returns true, this is our essentially delineating between the state, or the tests, the statement, the equation, and the results. And this first term is going to be, if this is true, then it's going to return this value. If this is not true, it's going to return this value. So this noise is going to be turned on if it's a stray hair, or turned off because it's on the mask if it's not a stray hair. Click apply, accept. So now you'll see when I turn that off, 10% of my hairs are going crazy. And we might even set that magnitude down lower. So let's say like 4. There you go. Right. So pretty helpful. For that noise, I mean, I could change it to a lot of things, right? So I could say, what I like to do as well is, let's say like $C length. There's a couple variables that already exist. So this is the length of the hair. So it's going to grab the length of the hair. And if the length of the hair is greater than, let's say, actually don't remember how long my hairs are, 1, then do this. Otherwise, don't do it. So click apply. And we'll turn that off. So none of my hairs are actually longer than 1. Okay, so they only go up to like 0.5 probably. So I'll change that. So if my C length is greater than 0.345, 3.35, click apply. You can see all the hairs that are longer than a certain value. You can see there's like these short hairs right there that aren't grabbed, right? So they're not being affected because they're not above that length. So, you can use that if else statement however you want to. So, but I'm just going to set this back to 1. Click apply. Okay. And I don't even need that one. Delete. Cool. So that's pretty much it on this one. If I went to add another description, so right when we were looking at that reference, right, we had those little tiny hairs. I could just go ahead and add another description up here. I could do description, create description. We'd want to make sure we had our geometry selected. And then it would have its own settings, its own maps, all that stuff, which is great. And I can have like these little tiny, really dense, a lot of hairs, but really short hairs. And that makes it a lot easier. I don't want to do those short hairs with the long hairs in the same description because that's going to be really annoying. I'd have to do like set something like 50% of my hairs are going to be this length and 50% of my hairs are going to be this other length. 50% of my hairs are going to be this width, 50% of my hairs are going to be this width. And I'd have to use a bunch of crazy expressions. It's doable. It's not bad. Too bad, but yeah. I'm not going to go over grooming. You guys kind of saw how it works. It just has all these different brushes that do different behaviors in an artistic way. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how this renders. And I actually have to open this in a different version of Maya because for some reason on this one, I can't choose the RenderMan renderer, which is really frustrating. While we're over here, actually, if you don't want this to render, so for instance, when I click on render, it might crash actually because I don't think I set this file up right. Let me go ahead and save this really quickly. So I'll save. We'll try it. Let's see what happens when we do it. It's a good chance it's going to crash. Nope. Okay. So you can see it's growing those hairs on the object, right? And so, if you're, for instance, like you want to turn off your Xgen, even if you hide those splines, they're still going to render. So what you want to do is if you don't want your hair to render, you can just go into the preview output, come down to output settings and set the render % to 0. Now it won't render at all. If you had a really high density, so let's say I had like 5,000 because I needed 5,000 hairs, but it's slowing down my computer in the viewport, you can go ahead and set the preview settings to fewer. So you can only look at a percentage of your hair. So that's really helpful if you're just trying to like do your groom in the viewport and you need really high density, but you don't really want to look at them at the same time because it's slowing you down. You can come in here and set that to a lower value for looking at the viewport. And if I ever need to hide it in the viewport, just click on this little button right here, this eyeball, and turn that back on. Okay, we can also set the primitive color. So by default right now, I think it does like this default color, this like brown color. But what you can do is you can load in a script. So let's just load expression, samples, UI, color, blue. And so you can see now it's loading it as a blue color. This isn't affecting how it's going to render. It's just how it looks in the viewport. And we can come in here and we can change that color to a different value. So I can do like, let's do like yellow. Right now they're like kind of like a yellowy color. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at how to render this out because this isn't actually applying a RenderMan shader to it. Okay, this is something that you might run into. In my case, I opened up Xgen. Normally when you open up your file again and you start the Xgen plugin by clicking on this window right here, it should show you your descriptions and your collections that you already have in this file. You can even see over here, I have them over here, but in my current version of Maya or something has a problem with locating them. You can see it's acting as if there is nothing there. If I turn that on, it's like, I don't know, there's nothing in here. So hopefully you are able to export your collection description. I can show you guys in a second how to do that. But usually when you save, it should create some collection files or Xgen files. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Import Collection. Going to go over here, and I'm going to find that in my folder. So I have this collection file right here. Click on Open, Import. In this case, I'm overwriting my collection because this actually exists in here, but it doesn't know that. And it might fail. So you can see it fails. So I'm going to go ahead and try it one more time. Okay, so it shows. So even though it says it had a fail, it still worked. But that is still kind of a problem because I still can't select my object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this collection. I recommend you do this on a backup, so make sure you're backing it up. I could do this off camera, but I wanted to do this just kind of in case people run into this issue again. Make sure you're not selecting the geometry itself, but the scalp geometry. So we're going to go ahead and I deleted my collection inside of the outliner. Go ahead and import collection. I'm going to grab my rows, grab that collection. Import's going to say fail again, but you can see it actually found it, added it, and I also have my information back. So if you don't have that, if you don't create that collection or doesn't create it when you, let's see if we can, okay, so that's still working. And I usually double check and just make sure it's updating. Okay, cool, it is updating. Sometimes it freezes or it locks and it doesn't work anymore. So if you ever need to export your stuff, you can just go File, Export Collections or Descriptions. And then I usually put them in my project folder. It wants to put them in the documents folder, but I wouldn't do that. It's better to keep them in your project. And so you can do that with both the collection and the description if you lose any of your data. Okay, so let's talk about rendering. So first I'm gonna go ahead and make sure this isn't gonna crash because it tends to want to today. All right, so it's working fine. So I'll go ahead and close that, discard. Another reason why you should be saving often and making versions. So we're gonna come to the preview output. And if we want to attach a shader to it, we're going to go down here to Operation Render and change the render to whatever render is. In this case, mine's RenderMan. Down here under Shading Group, we're going to assign a new material by clicking on this Connect Shader button. You have to click and hold. I don't know why. It is so sensitive, and you'll almost always accidentally add on a shader you don't want. So I'm going to go ahead and add a Pixar Marshner hair. So there's also the Llama hair Shang. But I would do the Marshner hair unless you want to do Llama materials. So we'll do that. We're going to go ahead and open up the outliner for this, or sorry, the Hypershade. Let's close that. I'm going to go add this to a new tab. So we have this Pixar Marshner hair. Pixar Marshner hair isn't super user-friendly, if you ask me. It is very technically or physically oriented, so it's something that you're gonna have to look up. There are presets to this, or there should be presets to this. You can download them, I think, of different types of hair. They added a new node that helps with it, so you can come in here and type in Pixar hair color, and you can see here it has result diffuse, result TT, and results TRT. And you can add that to the diffuse color, the specular color TT for this one, and specular color TRT for this one. And that's just the different specular lobes. So one of them is like light going through, one of them is light bouncing off, one of them is light going through and bouncing off from the inside. It's just based on like physically based how like hair shades. Okay. Cool thing about the Pixar hair model though is you have artistic and physical mode. You can base it on the melanin. So if you know the melanin, you can get natural hair colors from like, really, really, really dark brown and black to like really light blonde. You have like a tinting for red. You can randomize the values. You can darken the roots. You can change the strays, right? So you can do randomizing the hue as well. You can dye it. So it's like dyed a certain color. We also have an artistic one. So instead of melanin, we're just working with a flat color. So I can come over here and I can open up my IPR render. Okay. And so here we can see it. You can see this is kind of like a blue-green, most likely because I'm working in aces and those colors aren't quite color managed. So I'll probably want to do this less of a blue-green and a little bit more of like orange-green, something like that. Maybe bring it down the saturation a bit. And I might even bring the value down a little bit. So this is the basics for how to get this working with a RenderMan. I recommend you guys look up the material settings for the Pixar Martian hair. This is going to control how reflective it is, how shiny or how rough it is, how much light is transmitted through, how much light is bouncing off. If I come over here, let's take a look at it. We can kind of see it scattered from behind, right? Come over here. So you can see even at this distance, it's looking pretty good, and light travels through it, right? Just like real hair. And so it looks pretty good. What I might do in this case is I might maybe make these a little thinner, maybe make it a little less denser, maybe make it even a little shorter. If you're going to do any of that, you don't want to do it while it's rendering. One, because it's probably prone to crash, and two, any model changes aren't going to show up in here. As you add more hair, they're not going to change. So we might as well just go ahead and stop the render and restart it again once we're done. I might go ahead and bring the density down to maybe like that. Bring the length down a little bit. Maybe bring the width down so it's not quite so thick. We'll go ahead and start the IPR again. Let's see. Maybe we have to do a normal render. So let's do a normal render. Oh, let me go ahead and save it. Let's see. It's not quite packing it in. Save scene as, let's do that one right there. Continue. Okay. I'm just going to close this just for good luck and then go ahead and IPR it again. Okay, there we go. So less dense and smaller hairs now. I'm pretty sure it looks different. Cool. So that's pretty much Xgen. So what's really important to keep in mind is that we want to make sure that we create a duplicate of our object that we want to attach Xgen to. We don't want to do it on our actual geometry. We want to go ahead and freeze its transformations. We want to delete, we want to go ahead and first go to the UVs, make sure the UVs are laid out nicely for it. I don't know why the UVs aren't showing up for this one. For the stem scalp, so does it have to be visible? I don't think so. So for some reason the stem scalps UVs are missing. I don't know what happened there, but our UVs should be in the first tile. Try to take up as much space as you can. And then I want to delete history on that object. So delete by type history. I don't want to do it now. Once you start Xgen, you don't want to do that. Then what we do is we go ahead and select that geometry and we have that window pulled up, or if we already have this pulled up, we create a description with the geometry selected. We're going to do groomable splines if we're doing short hair, or actually, yeah, let me do this. Let's do create description. So we have splines if you're going to do long hair, and groomable splines if you want to do short hair. Create a collection or add it, name it, create it. And then we're going to set the density, the length, width, width ramp. You can do the tilting. You don't have to do that stuff. And then we use the modifiers to give it some randomization and variation. And those expressions are really powerful, right? Those expressions are going to make it feel more organic and less uniform, right? So making use of the expressions and the modifiers is really key to making your hair, whatever you're creating, whether it's hair or fuzzies on an old sweater, is what's going to make it feel really organic. So we'll come in here and we'll just open up our expression editor. This is annoying. So this is the issue with this version of 2020 is it tends to not want to open up the expression editor. So let me go and open that really quickly. Okay, so I just clicked on that little expression editor right here. The nomenclature, or sorry, syntax is $, and then a name for calling or setting a variable. And then, using equal signs to set a value to it. We have all these functions. I recommend you guys check out the functions. Actually, you can find a lot of them. So you can see here, if I go to Help tab, we have a lot of information on how it sets or what the syntax is for these expression editors. It doesn't have everything, so I recommend you guys take a look at them. But we also have all these functions, so it's nice to kind of look up these functions, like finding the min value, adding some noise, grabbing or setting a length. Grabbing the length of a vector. any math functions you want to need to do. I don't think a lot of you guys are probably going to be doing that. And also pre-existing variables. So if you want to grab anything that already exists in the groom, so like the length of your guides, how many guides there are, the name of the certain guide, so each one can have its own ID, you can grab that here. Wait, cancel. And so then we want to make sure there's a semicolon after each line, so that that just clarifies that this is a line and it's ending. And you're going to get an error if whenever let's say I'll do it like this. Apply. You can see syntax error, and a lot of times also it will have a message down here for error message that's just telling me that this has also is doing something it doesn't like. But that's just going to cause an issue. Oh, there we go. Oh, and I have that vaccine problem. I'm gonna have to clean this file up. Open now. It doesn't want to open. Oh, that's because this is the old file. Okay. Let me go and bring that up one more time. Okay. So semicolon ends the line. And the last line should not have a semicolon, and it's essentially going to return whatever the result of this line is. If I'm calling just a single variable, it's going to return whatever that variable is. If I multiply or create like an expression or a equation or something like that, it will return that. So if I did like $a minus $ran, right, those two expressions, then it will do that. So that's the basic syntax. Like I said, I recommend you guys check these out on the website, the official RenderMan website, and there's also people share their scripts online, just so you guys can get an idea of how to mess around with this and how you can do some really cool stuff in the expression editor. Like I said, the expression editor is going to give you a ton of power, a ton of control if you know what you're doing, and same thing with the modifiers. And last, I'm not going to cover this again. Please go back and watch it, is creating a paint map to control where our stuff is. So as a reminder, make sure that you are saving your versions, exporting out your collection descriptions. Another thing I recommend, especially if you're doing like really complex grooms and hair, is that you want to go ahead and back up your maps too. Because if I could actually open up something and erase a map that I created, and you might not think that's very important now, but once you created, for instance, something that I personally have a hard time with a lot of times is a region map. Essentially, it defines like clusters of hair to follow in a particular direction. Not really useful for this type of groon, but those can be really complex and kind of annoying to have to work with. And if you delete that by accident, it's just like end of the world kind of stuff. So what I would do is I would come over here to wherever this is at, my collection, and I would just compress it however you can compress it. I have WinRAR, and then just save it as a backup. So if you lose some of your maps for some reason, what you can do is you can delete this folder, unpack that backup you had, and just replace it in that location. These locations really important. So this Xgen file, this Xgen folder with all its packed folders underneath and all the files underneath needs to be in wherever you set your project. So my project's set to the file called, or the folder called rows. And so if I am not in, or if this Xgen folder is not in rows, then my Xgen is going to break unless I've set the project to where that's at. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so hopefully that's a lot of information. I know this is a long video, but hopefully this covers kind of the basis of what you need to know for Xgen for creating like a small randomized groom for something like, fuzzies or like loose threads or something like that on an asset for look development.